All right, so that should be just cosine x. So we're distributing a negative cosine x. Negative cosine x times 1 is a negative cosine x. Then we have negative cosine x times a negative cosine x, which would be a positive cosine squared x. All over, we're going to leave it as sine squared x, 1 minus cosine x. Here's what we need to recognize. We have a sine squared plus a cosine squared. That is just going to equal 1. Cosine squared and sine squared always equal just 1. So on top we will have, let's come down to the bottom. On the bottom we are going to have 1 minus cosine x all over sine squared x times 1 minus cosine x. Well, since it's a multiplication, we can cancel those out. That is going to be 1 over sine squared x, which is going to equal cosecant squared x. So all of that equals cosecant squared x. It was really just the idea behind it, that if you have two fractions, you push them together. There was another method to solving this one. You didn't have to push the fractions together. What was another method we could have used? The fractions would have ended up together, but we didn't necessarily look at it. Yeah?
You could have multiplied the first part, the 1 over 1 minus cosine, both the top and bottom by 1 plus cosine.
Yep. So I said anytime you see this 1 minus cosine x, that an easy method to do, right, Alec? All three of you know this? Okay. You're going to multiply the top and bottom by its conjugate, which would be 1 plus cosine x. So if you'd multiply this one fraction by 1 plus cosine x over 1 plus cosine x, you would end up with sine squared x down here. 1 plus cosine x minus cosine x, you just would have had 1 over sine squared, and you would have been done. So in fact, that probably would have been the easier method of the two. So keep both of those in the back of your mind. Either you can push fractions together, or recognize when you should multiply by the conjugate. All right, that being said, what questions do we have from the homework? Yeah. 79. Do you have a specific question? Okay, the left-hand side. So the left-hand side is sine of 180 degrees minus alpha. And the left-hand side is 1 minus cosine squared alpha over sine alpha. Okay, the left-hand side. The left-hand side is just a subtraction of angles. So we're going to write that out as sine of 180 degrees times cosine alpha minus our cosine of our first angle, which is 180 degrees, times the sine of alpha. But parts of that are on your unit circle. The sine of 180 degrees is on the unit circle. 180 degrees is right here. So the sine of 180 degrees is just 0. So instead of 180 degrees, we're going to write 0, because that's what it equals. Not minus. Now the cosine of 180 degrees right here is negative 1. So it's going to be negative 1 times the sine alpha. Well, this is just 0. Negative times a negative is a positive, so this half is sine alpha. And you said you did the other side, right? So you had sine alpha on the other side? Does that make sense, though? So if it's on the unit circle, do it. So if they give you a value like sine of pi over 2, just know to actually do the math and get the number out. Yeah. Other questions? Gracie.
81.
Say that again?
81.
Did we have an 81? Oh, I see it. All right. I just had it disorganized on my sheet. All right. So 81. 81 was the big thing was so we had cosine of x plus y on top, right? So you need to rewrite that as cosine x times cosine y minus sine x times sine y. Did you do that? Yes. Okay. So let me just take a picture of it. All right, so this step right here is just me expanding this using that identity guide. That cosine of alpha plus beta equals cosine alpha, cosine beta minus sine alpha, sine beta. All right, so that was just me redoing the top. Bottom stayed the same. Well, now we can split this apart into two fractions. We can split it into this part over our denominator and this part over our denominator connected by our negative sign. Because if I had this, I could push it together. So if I can push it together, I can pull it apart. And that always works as long as you keep the same denominator with both of them. All right, in this case, we have cosine x, cosine y over cosine x, cosine y. Well, that's just 1. That's the same thing over the same thing, which just equals 1. Well, this fraction is sine of x over cosine of x, which is tangent x, and sine y over cosine y, which is just tangent y. So the big thing was splitting this apart. Okay? Yeah. Other questions? All right, if there's no other questions, the rest of the time is actually yours. There is no lesson today. You just have a bunch of, it looks really short, but they're tough problems. For instance, look at 83. 83 is going to get really big before it gets smaller. Because you're going to look at that sine alpha plus beta times sine alpha minus beta. You are going to expand both of those, making sure they stay as quantities. So for example, sine alpha plus beta, you should rewrite it as quantity sine alpha cosine beta plus cosine alpha sine beta close parentheses. So that should all stay as one unit. And then you would do sine alpha minus beta, which would be open parentheses sine alpha cosine beta minus cosine alpha sine beta close parentheses. So keep every element in parentheses. So it's going to get really big, and then you'll be able to start working down until you get to something that looks just like the right-hand side. So in fact, in both of those problems, you shouldn't do anything to the right-hand side. Everything should be done to the left-hand side. Ask questions.